Hello again, Paul Heinze, Goldberg Heinze Business Advisors, with my friend and colleague and senior attorney with Masuda Funai here in the Chicago area, Greg Wright. And we're halfway into the 2001 season. I have to say, Greg, glad that you're here again. Looking
Pleasure to
forward
be here.
to talking with you about how things are. And so I'll ask the question, what's new?
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you again, Paul. Well, what's new, I think, is that uh, mergers and acquisitions activity has really taken off in the first half of 2021 and is set to become, I think, even more frenetic in the second half of the year. We're looking to a year of a high volume and a lot of success for our clients in buying and selling companies and growing. And as I think you and I have spoken about previously, a lot of that is, I think, fueled by the availability of capital. There's been increased borrowing over the course of the pandemic. There's an opportunity for further buying, I think, or borrowing rather, um, over the next couple of months, given the fact that we're about to, continuing to get, financial reporting back from companies that isn't necessarily tainted by a period of artificial um, lack of growth or by reliance on government PPP loans, things of that nature. We also have, a lot of demand on both sides. I think companies are looking to M&A for growth opportunities. We have a lot of sellers in the baby boomer generation, the later half of it largely, for whom their companies really are their retirement plan. And it's very important to time your exit properly when the value of your company is that important to your future. And we're finally moving into a period now where valuations are rising. There's improved economic certainty, and so we're seeing a lot of activity, both with very large companies, which the sorts of things you read in the Wall Street Journal, but even when you dig past some of these blockbuster mergers in the entertainment industry that don't really affect us. There's a lot of activity among middle market manufacturing, machine tooling companies, logistics companies here in Chicago and elsewhere.
Good. Where's capital gains going? Any ideas in that area?
My goodness, if I knew, I would love to tell you. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I've got any information on that. What I have seen is that in connection with the negotiation of the infrastructure package, it is possible, if the Democrats in particular have a lot of strength in what comes out of those negotiations, we could see a rise in the corporate tax rate back to something closer to what it was prior to tax reform.
The shortages of material across several industries,
Mhm.
the fortification of benefits to people as far as unemployment or supplementation to income has caused a shortage of available labor.
Mhm.
Is that going to bring, as I suspect, some sort of price pressure upward and an inflationary environment? What's your thought?
I think it really could. I mean, and it's affecting all industries, but it's affecting some particular industries, very specifically. The ones that I think are getting the most attention are industries like hospitality, which have been decimated by the pandemic to begin with, and now they're having a very difficult time, uh, bringing in folks back to work to meet rising demand or resuming demand.
Mhm.
But that affects all sorts of work. It affects people in middle market manufacturing. It affects people in the food industry and sector, in construction. And so if wages rise, presumably that would have an effect on prices overall, as would increases to things like lumber. And there have been shortages in semiconductors, which have
Yes.
affected automotive production, which you're I'm sure aware of. And so these goods shortages, I mean, aside from just sort of disrupting ordinary commerce, will presumably cause everything from rental cars to new cars to just overall prices to go up a bit. Another good reason, I think, if you're looking to finance an acquisition, you know, seems like a good time to do it before some of the inflation might hit home. Hopefully it won't, but that's always a concern.
Yes. In terms of employment, lack of employment, privacy, things having to do with encroaching on the rights of employees versus the rights of employers. Anything new?
Well, there's not necessarily something new in the law, but the the strength with which it's being enforced. A lot of your listeners may be hearing about a rise in some lawsuits that are affecting, in particular, employers in manufacturing who use time clocks. We've got a very stringent statute here in the state of Illinois called the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. And that act's been around since 2008. It's designed to protect consumers from company use without consumer knowledge and consent regarding things like the iris of your eye, your fingerprint, your handprint. And there were some really high profile pieces of litigation over the past few years. Facebook is about to pay out a large sum of money to Illinois users in connection with the use of their faces for tagging. McDonald's is currently in an issue right now where they're trying to speed up drive-through times by using information tied to a visitor or a guest's voice and maybe in connection with their car or their license plate. And you can get around the statutory restrictions in this law by providing consent, or obtaining consent rather, from the consumer or from the individual from whom you're collecting this data. Now, why does this affect manufacturing clients? It affects manufacturing clients because a lot of customers have gone in the past couple of years to digital time clocks to avoid individuals from having one of their colleagues punch them in or out, just to provide certainty in terms of attendance. And a lot of companies have gone to these methods the last couple of years, and they weren't aware necessarily of the very stringent laws here in Illinois. The tough part about this is over the last couple of years, the Illinois courts have interpreted this act to state that you don't really, as a plaintiff, have to prove that you were at all damaged. There are fixed statutory damages of $1,000 per plaintiff, and it can go to $5,000 if you were intentional or reckless. And you multiply that by every individual who ever punched into your time clock. And over a long period of time of many years, you can be looking at 5-6 figure settlements where you as a company don't have a lot of room to negotiate because they're effectively strict liability. So they're terribly frustrating to a lot of our clients because they feel that they were following guidance by HR companies or by other people in other states who use these as a matter of course. There are ways to handle it, but you have to have the proper consent in advance, and you have to know when you can and can't use that information for your company's benefit.
Recently, personally, there's been a circumstance regarding the bank and the bank security.
Mhm.
For example, we had a significant amount of money deposited based on the completion of a transaction.
Mhm.
We, in the matter of course, have a distribution policy. And after the check clears, and you don't get cashier's checks very often anymore. Sometimes it's a wire transfer, but sometimes it's a hard driving check from the corporation at the conclusion of a transaction.
Mhm.
And after a couple of days, we checked, the check hadn't cleared. And then it hadn't cleared on the third day,
Mhm.
or the fourth day, or the fifth day. And on the sixth day, business day, it cleared.
Mhm.
So, trying to be a responsible business owner, manager with colleagues that I work with, we called up and we found out that there was a newly developed policy by this particular bank, effective December of this last year, saying they are holding deposits in excess of $5,000 for a period of 6 business days before they release the funds. I'm having a difficult time understanding why. Would you have any insight into that? And I'm not the only one to whom this has affected. It's
Sure.
a protection. They're holding the money. Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not aware of any regulatory change that would be driving that specifically, but it's part of a trend over the last number of years where banks are really requiring a lot more information about clients, even to open simple deposit accounts, a lot more information about taking or transferring funds, even by wire, than they used to do. And now, there's sort of this concept of holding funds for a number of days, above and beyond what would be necessary in order to mechanically do it. It seems consistent with those general trends, but I'm not sure of a particular regulatory reason why that's come to pass.
I think the business owner should be aware of the changes in banks, in
Mhm.
bank relationships, and act accordingly. First, find out the fees that they charge. Second of all, find out the new policies.
Mhm.
Because we did discover that at the bottom of a bank statement in fine print, it said, oh, by the way, effective such and such a date, there will be, and yes, that's absolutely correct. In all my days, I would never have spent time studying the bank statement for announcements like that. So it was a surprise. It wasn't harmful, it was surprising and a little bit disappointing. So I think
Certainly.
a word to the wise is sufficient here. Let's rewind for a moment, Greg.
Mhm.
Here we have Mr. Jones, who's the owner of a business, and he's getting ready to retire. He's getting ready to do things as far as the possible sale of his business. To what extent have estate or inheritance tax liabilities changed, or do you anticipate them changing in the near future, especially the marital deduction?
Again, I've not seen any specific information about changes on those fronts, coming forward. The change in corporate tax rates really seems to be, the one change that has been most specifically discussed. Um, that said, at some point here, there is going to need to be a discussion about how some of the president's priorities or congressional priorities are funded. And I think a number of those adjustments may come into play.
Mhm.
There are, of course, there was a discussion as part of the President's Signature Act a couple of months ago. This new child tax credit that's finally going to be hitting individuals' mailboxes. That said, that phases out. I forget the figure specifically, but that phases out at sort of a traditional middle class level as well. Um, and so I think it's important for people to follow the changes that are coming down the pike so that they can make appropriate plans for when to divest.
In your opinion, and insofar as a trend may be developing, is merging between smaller companies appearing more frequently now than an outright sale of a business?
I'm still seeing a fair number of asset sales rather than mergers. Second behind that would be an equity transaction of stock or limited liability company interests. Mergers tend to be a little bit more rare, and where we do see them, they tend to be sometimes part of a transaction that is it's a merger in the context of an acquisition. So potentially a subsidiary that acquires assets and is then merged into the parent of the purchasing entity. We're not seeing a tremendous number or certainly any rise in the number of pure mergers as opposed to other kinds of acquisitions.
Are there any tax laws regarding the sale of the business that are about to change or have changed in terms of uh, percentages or structure of federal taxes, especially in a transaction?
Again, I think the number to look at here over the next couple of months is just whether or not there's a reversal of that standard corporate tax rate. Aside from that, I haven't seen any proposals that look like they have legs.
Sometimes clients of ours or prospective clients of ours ask us regarding a location overseas.
Mhm,
Build a subsidiary
mhm.
division overseas, acquire one, or enter into some form of formalized relationship.
Mhm.
From your perspective, is there any real advantage in that, or do you have to be a particular size, or any other restrictive or common sense elements that would come into play?
I think that's highly fact specific, really. I mean, we see a lot of clients who have manufacturing presences in Mexico and Canada for obvious reasons with our geographic proximity and our free trade relationships with those countries. Obviously, to the extent that you're interested or your company's interested in accessing mature consumer markets, you have opportunities in the UK, in the European Union, Um, uh, Frankly, there's been a change over the last decade or so. There really used to be a push for a lot of clients to manufacture in Southeast Asia, specifically in the People's Republic of China. There still is a lot of manufacturing that goes on there, but now there's such a mature, desirable consumer marketplace there that a lot of companies attempt to invest there because they want access to the Chinese consumer market.
Good.
And obviously, there are a lot of other Southeast Asian countries where um, there's some mix of the two, where there's some advantage to manufacture, and there's some advantage to reaching a new client base. But I think it just depends largely on specifically what your, who your customer is, what it is that you're manufacturing or building or designing, and where ultimately it's being transmitted.
Getting close to the conclusion of our discussion, let me finish by asking this question. Oftentimes, not terribly often, but oftentimes, clients come to us simply saying, I have received correspondence from a foreign corporation wanting to discuss with us the acquisition of our company.
Mhm.
Are there any particular signals, flags that you would raise immediately, or is there a particular emphasis or specialty in Masuda Funai for international transactions?
There is, yes. So Masuda Funai handles, in addition to our domestic practice, which, as I said, focuses largely on middle market companies in manufacturing, logistics, and machine tooling and the like. We handle a large number of cross-border transactions as well. Historically and currently, we've got a lot of great relationships with clients in Japan and in Europe, and so we do have experience with that. To the extent that a company is interested in investing overseas or has been approached for a potential investment overseas, I think it's important that you sort of take that opportunity to bring it to a trusted business advisor, or bring it to an attorney, such as someone, at a firm that has experience handling those matters. They'll give you an idea effectively of how to diligence the company properly, how to review its financials, how to take a look at the product that it's developing, that it seeks to manufacture. One additional issue, a couple of additional issues you have to look into if you're working with a potential cross-border partner is, any sort of restriction on the particular type of merger or acquisition. There are, restricted areas where the government under CFIUS can actually block a transaction on substantive grounds. There are also concerns about, rising trade barriers. There are constantly movements between the United States and some of our allies and adversaries abroad, our competitors rather, I guess, with respect to moving goods around the world. And so it's, I guess sort of as I hinted at earlier when we were talking about places to invest, it's important to partner up with, with a company that sort of meets all of your needs and isn't going to add more additional financial headaches, rather than add symmetry to a transaction.
Certainly, I would support that. There should be no fear in considering being acquired by a foreign purchaser, and by the same token, to buy a company in another country with the right experienced advice and support. It takes the darkness and the mystery away from it.
Agreed.
We've been talking with Greg Wright of Masuda Funai, which is always an enlightening, pleasurable experience. We're grateful for your time and we're grateful for your insight. Thank you for listening to us again. We invite your comments on areas that you believe we should be covering for you, as well as for your colleagues in business and industry. For Greg Wright, I'm Paul Heinze. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. Bye for now.